tubular bells from The Exorcist. That might be a way to begin.
Woohoo!
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Freitag. That is Friday, the last work day before next week's complete solar eclipse. If you're in New England, as I am, and you're heading north, as I am, you'll get to see a primo view of a rare event of the sun occluded by the moon, and the world will go dark but for a moment. And of course, people will think, wait a minute, isn't that what happened when Jesus was crucified? Yeah, you can think that. But you can also think that it's going to be the day that the Lord has made, and you should rejoice and be glad in it. And stop and pause for a moment to consider the wonder of it all. You know, I've had an eventful 24 hours.
Good morning, Norm.
Good morning.
We're going to do
morning,
that
Mike.
now on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like, how about a little human touch and connection as opposed to just kind of running right in? So what? Yeah, I feel you, bro. What up in North Carolina?
It's a beautiful morning. It's a little unseasonably cool, but it's
what does that mean? Below 80, you know?
in the 40s this morning, which we've had just gorgeous weather here. Spring in North Carolina is one of God's great gifts to the planet. And as I say, good morning to all the new subscribers that we have overnight. You know, Norm appeared on Joe's show last night, Good Logic, and there are several hundred of you. So good morning if any of you are with us. But as I say on this stream quite often, Norm, North Carolina is the center of the known universe. And the expression...
Yeah, the problem is those who know it don't know much. The real center of the known universe is the Northeast Kingdom, Vermont, where we had 14 inches of snow the other day. So I said to my plow guy and groundskeeper, open the Mons for my daughter and I, because we're going to go look at the eclipse. Last night, I had the most amazing night. You know, I love running my mouth. That's why we have this podcast. That's why I'm a lawyer. That's why I do stand-up comedy. That's why I have become suddenly a sought-after a dinner speaker. So last night I was offered an opportunity to speak to the New Haven Ladies Aid Society. And because they were meeting at the Graduate Club here in New Haven, just a few blocks from my office, and it was a free meal, I thought, sure. I didn't really think much about it. So I'd go trundling over there, you know, dinner and a reception at 6, dinner at 7, and then talk for a half an hour or so thereafter. And I go to a group of women on the first floor registration table. That's not them. They're upstairs. I walk up to the third floor and I walk into a room of 25 or so men my age or older. And that's an accomplishment. Let me tell you, young people, you should live so long. Okay. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, where are the ladies? So I go up to a guy and says, is this the New Haven Ladies Aid Society? Yeah. I said, well, help me understand the gender bending significance of this. He said, well, the society, there are several, it's been around for a century or so. And basically it started as a bunch of guys who every Thursday got together to have dinner to give their housekeepers and wives the night off for preparing meals. And so it's a social club. And, you know, me, a social club, oh, me of unclean lips. So I had prepared some remarks. And when it was time to speak, I said, you know, I'm going to take a risk here, guys. And, you know, the guy seated to my left was one of the regions, maybe North America's most prominent neurosurgeons. So we talked a little bit about the structure of brains and about dark matter and about all the space in the universe and what it is to be a human. And he warned me, he says, I'm kind of out there. And I said, I bet you I can double down on that. And we had a great conversation. To my right was a lawyer that I've known and respected for many years, a few years older than me. So I stood up and I said, you know, here's what I'd like. I'd like to unveil a hypothesis to you. You know, prominent doctors, lawyers, bankers, real estate investors, sort of the New Haven's blue blood, you know. And that hypothesis is that we're due for another great awakening, a spiritual turning point in American history. And I paused to see if they'd throw me out, if they'd roll their eyes, if they'd call Jeeves, and if they would call Jeeves and say, usher this madman out of the room. And I said, consider consider the current state of politics in the United States. And they had a special interest. The person who invited me was part of some litigation that my office is engaged in on behalf of the Italian American Defense League. We are suing the city of New Haven for unlawfully removing a statue of one Christopher Columbus from Wooster Square, a prominent area of New Haven in the Italian American community. And just by way of history, in I think, I can't remember if it was 1891, 11 Italian Americans were massacred, lynched in New Orleans when they were acquitted of charges that they had engaged in conspired to murder the chief of police in New Orleans. The next year, Benjamin Harrison signed into law an act creating Columbus Day, and Columbus statues were put up all over the country to commemorate the contribution of Italian Americans to American life. They had to overcome their own unwelcoming party into the United States, and they became part of what we regard as America. Now, of course, in 2020, these statues are removed in the paroxysm that became known as the George Floyd movement, and we live in an era where contested identities have become the mother milk of American politics, and the result is we're deeply divided. We're screaming at one another. Each identity is saying, almost as the pot says to the potter in Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, "Why makest me thus?" And politics has become a zero-sum game. Recognize me or die. Recognize me or be canceled. And the result is we have politics that are unsustainable. A Congress that can barely work, political parties and political rhetoric that doesn't match the reality of our lives, and we are desperate for some unifying event in the country. It turns out, if you look at the broad sweep of American history, going back to before the Republic, 1730, 35, and the First Great Awakening, there have always been moments in American history where things were so chaotic that people were driven to their knees. Driven to their knees in despair over their current condition. And on their knees, they looked upward and they experienced the grace of a loving God. And you're saying, wait a minute, isn't this a legal podcast? Well, yeah, it is, but it's devoted to law and legitimacy. Every 50 to 80 years in American history, there has been some sort of spiritual crisis where things didn't work and people had to come back together. And we're about due. The last great one, according to some historians, was in the 1960s, when we saw a sort of spiritual upheaval in counterculture. We saw the Jesus movement. We saw the beginning of fractures that exist to this day between conservatives, liberals, and whatnot. And now the tables have turned on political ideologies, and we're every bit as divided. And so I raised with them the possibility that we are on the verge of another spiritual awakening in American history. And I made the following prediction, which I will reassert here, that in the next 5 years, we will see a resurgence of institutional and communal religious life. And the reason we will is that if we don't, we will descend into a Somalia-like chaos. And no one is served by that. To return to the Roman orator Cicero, as I did last night and do here from time to time, a res publica, a public thing, a commonwealth, isn't just any collection of people. It's a collection of people bound together by common interests and a common conception of right or righteousness. In the United States, we have common interests. You don't want to get killed on the highway. You don't want to get mugged when you're going to pick up a half a gallon of milk, and you want your investments more or less managed well by the third parties. Your bankers or whoever. We have the rule of law to create settled expectations in society. So we have common interests, but we don't have a common sense of righteousness. And I view identity politics, that I told this crowd, as a form of idolatry, love of self, or as Augustine would say, love of the wrong thing. And so I started to talk to them about King David, from ancient Israel, the most powerful man in the world at that time, or at least in Israel, but yet driven continually to his knees, looking ever upward to the heavens for the grace of a God to shine on him, to redeem him from his own sins and shortcomings and fears. And from the book of Psalms. And I was getting ready to have some at me, but what were in the eyes of those who attended, that recognized the power of the Psalms, who recognized the power of seeking righteousness, not in their own interests, but in the eyes of a God who created the world out of nothing. And it was quite an evening, so when we talked a little bit about cases, I can't, I have become sort of a holy fool, mocking myself, mocking the world, and mocking everything about about me in a comedic way. Holding up mirrors to the world and saying, "Is this what you really believe? Isn't it absurd?" And so, perfect example. I said, we're here in the shadow of Yale. There are physicists here, philosophers here who seriously consider the possibility that in a universe of infinite dimension, infinitely long, going back, beyond time immemorial, infinitely vast, starry heavens some night. In such a universe, these physicists say, where infinity is real, math suggests that that the possible becomes probable, that the probable becomes true, because in infinity, any collection of variables can gather together and create anything you can imagine. Therefore, and I mean, I'm telling you this, there are people with tenure who actually believe that we could be avatars in a universe on a video game played by bored teenagers in a universe that we'll never know. And why do they say that? Because if it's possible, it becomes probable. Given the mathematics of infinity, it is the case. That's just crazy as far as I'm concerned. These are the same people who will mock the Judeo-Christian tradition and say that to suggest that the world was created out of nothing by a loving God and that mankind was created in the image of God is a childlike foolishness. Oh, give me, as Tertullian might once have said, the foolishness of the cross. Give me the foolishness of faith. Give me the foolishness of a candid and rational response to the presence of the universe over this physicist nonsense about being an avatar in a video game called Twisted Norm. And so I shared this with these guys, and I was scared. I was scared that they would reject it. I was scared that they'd think it was foolish. But instead, we had a warm discussion that lasted far longer than the evening was intended to last. And I think I made some new friends that night. And I'm hoping that in this discussion with them and in this discussion with you, you'll be open to the possibility that there is meaning in the universe and that meaning is accepted on the basis of faith. And I'm not preaching any particular religion. I want you to follow our thing and maybe someday monetize us. So I'm not selling anything, right? And that message was actually well received by some of the heaviest hitters in Southern Connecticut last night at a dinner. And I hope it gets them talking. I hope it begins to light a spark, because we need to believe. We need the power of faith. We need to understand ourselves in the universe in order to get out of our current malaise. And so what's a good way to do this, folks? I was on a radio show before I got on this morning, and the host wanted to talk about Trump and whatnot. And I said, nah, Trump stump. I gave the host the following question. I said, I've got a pop quiz for you. His name is Vinnie Penn. Why is there a world better than not? And I paused. That's every cross-examiner's strategy. Used silence when you've got your witness in a position in which he's uncomfortable. I said, you can't really say, can you? And we talked about the problem of creation of the universe, and we talked about the problem of space and time and our being in the world. And I summoned him to regard, as I summon you, each of you, to regard next week's solar eclipse as a unique event in the physical universe, as an awe-inspiring event, something beyond our control that is clearly evident to all of us. I'm not going to join the Alex Jones, the crowd that says, this is a sign of the apocalypse, this, that, or the other thing. It's not. It's just it's a chance alignment of things in the universe that summons a sense of reverence, summons a sense of awe, and if only for a moment should take you out of your head and open you to the possibility that there is a world out there beyond your control, a world that was created, didn't necessarily, I don't know by how, I don't know by whom, I wasn't around to believe it, but to a moral certainty that before you were, there was a world, and before there was a world, what was there? And we don't know. And so we're summoned, I think, to act in faith. And I believe, and I'm doubling down here, hopefully we're still around doing this podcast when the time comes, that within the next 5 years, we will see something like a great awakening in the United States. And I'm not sure what'll trigger it. But I do know
I think it's long. I think it's long underway. I think it's long underway, and I'll take a little credit here for maybe incepting.
Take a lot.
Some of your thesis there. I believe I've said something very similar to you, perhaps in private conversations, but my overwhelming sense over the last several years has been essentially what you're saying. What strikes me about your sort of rendezvous with the movers and the shakers in Southern Connecticut last night, and the I guess the happenstance of these conversations, is that I believe most reasonable people have hit their rev limiter with respect to lying. I think a lot of what you're saying is premised on a return to a recognition of an objective truth, like a capital T truth, right? That we have a measurable world. And many of the best features of Western civilization have emanated from a common sense of right, a common recognition of right, common interests, our laws, and the good faith element that is the sort of glue between those laws and customs is how we move about, and that requires a common definition of very critical things, right? And so
yeah,
people who would otherwise have been voting, if we take this from a partisan perspective, those who have money to spend and to invest in campaigns and to put behind those that say the right things and make them feel as though they're not, edgy or subverting civil rights or racist or sexist or whatever, they may have hit their limit with bullshit, and they may be willing now to acknowledge that what they have been party to has been in large measure a huge scam, which has feasted on their good faith, which has feasted on their empathy. And it takes someone like you, Norm, and I want to get to this article very briefly before we move on. It takes someone like you, Norm, to not only say these things in the manner in which you say them, right? Because you are gifted in a number of ways, but that is one, delivering the message.
I've been touched.
And I think more importantly, guiding people into sort of new pathways to discovering these long held institutional truths on their own, because this article talks about sort of the those that are sort of unchurched, right? Millennials and Gen Z in particular, right? It takes a second to acknowledge that. I am one of those millennials that would be considered probably by Tom Green as unchurched, but that does not mean that I don't have some foundation, some curiosity, and certainly a willingness, especially as a married man, a father, a business owner, a homeowner, right, a member of a community. There are certain things as a callback to that objective sense of truth that are enshrined in these texts and in these traditions that you speak, because you said, I'm not going to just favor one thing over the other. What's clear, though, is that most people are recognizing that the modern political left is, in essence, its own version of a cult, that the current administration.
Well, let's be equal
things.
opportunity spiritualists here. Donald Trump and the MAGA people aren't much better at some occasions. There was a story in the front page of the Times this week
Difference is
about
power,
Trump rallies
right?
coming to resemble religious events. I'm not sure, Mike. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to I don't want to make it into a partisan event. I'll let you go in a minute, but I want to talk about Dawn's comment. Will the new Great Awakening be ecumenical or Christian, more civic or church focused? Dawn, I don't know. But I do know that people need to feel united. It's that old Ciceronian thing, by a common sense of righteousness. It may be that we've outrun the cultural significance of the church as it existed, and we need to reform or challenge a church or churches or civil society to do something different. But there's a sense of urgency in the air, and that is going to lead something to break. And when it breaks, we'll be open to experience the world in new ways, which is why what I think of is the significance symbolically, of next week's eclipse. I mean, just take a look around you and realize how small we are in the universe at large, how large our hopes are for ourselves and others, and ask yourselves, how do you become aligned with your significance in the universe, your significance to others, your significance to yourself, in a way that makes sense in a social and political surrounding? That's what makes a turning point in history. That's what makes a crisis. I think we are at a crisis point in American history. But sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's perfectly okay. There wasn't anything in particular beyond what I said that I was trying to get to. But I think I'm mirroring back or reflecting back to you that I can sense a real appetite, a real hunger for meaning, for personal fulfillment, for a collective and therefore a collective vision of the future among those of my generation. I think that
I think there is.
and a lot of that is driven by what is largely being revealed right now to have been short-term sort of scammy policy choices at the federal, state, and local levels, and they, those sort of permeated every aspect of my age group's life, and there are those of us who have been able to navigate accordingly and get above it, and then there are those of us who are sadly have been subjugated by that, spiritually speaking. But I think
Well, all right.
it's
So
all
this segment of the show has been brought to you by the Shirley MacLaine Institute for Philosophical and Religious Understanding in American Life. For a contribution of $6.66, the mark of the beast, you too can get a mug that said Shirley Speaks. And, if you drink from that mug, the water of the ordinary water of life will become the blood of whomsoever, and you will live eternally. If you believe that, you can probably, in this infinite universe of ours, find somebody online selling it. It's not us. We are simply trying to sell simple truths that resonate in our hearts and that may or may not resonate with you. So let's leave the Shirley MacLaine Institute, and go back to our normal quotidian and talk about, I don't know, Bill of Rights for sex workers in New York. What in the world? Strippers?
Washington State, Norm. Washington State.
I'm going to tell strippers everywhere that, I'm a simpleton, so please don't disrobe in front of me. But if you have to, you have a right to do so. And you can consider my office a sanctuary city. But in the absence of that, what is a stripper's Bill of Rights?
Yeah, well, in this context, Norm, I've branded this segment according to my view of what this really is. So for those of you who are new, Mark Randazza once referred to me as the Tom Brady of beer law. But what he really meant was that I was, very handsome and extraordinarily skilled within the regulatory and administrative apparatus that governs really tightly controlled industries.
I didn't know that Mark was legally blind.
Doesn't matter, right?
Well, I mean, for him to consider you very handsome, that would take something like that. I mean, no. I mean, look,
he was hanging
for
from
a 34-year-old guy from North Carolina, you've got a little bit going on.
Like he was hanging from my bicep when he was saying it too, right? I was doing this number. Anyway, so what I know very well is that where there are some sorts of, the adult entertainment industry is, long-standing. It's a well-known industry, and there are players that often have multiple venues, multiple businesses. This is branded by the Washington State as something that is supposed to strengthen employee protections and rights within the adult entertainment industry, the live entertainment, whatever. What it actually is, Norm, is a backdoor for local government to coerce business owners to incur more cost and expense for security measures, security guards, protocol, training, all of these various things, audits and reporting to the government, a link between the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board and now I forget the actual government body that is over the adult entertainment stuff. But ultimately, what's happening here is that this industry is going to die. It will consolidate. I'm not going to say it's going to die totally, but this industry will consolidate, right? And it's because this is a very common practice.
We refer to sex work as work and as an industry. I mean, what passes between a man and a woman in a moment of intimacy?
Oh, this is about strippers, man. This is about venues that actually have live performance on a pole with music, that kind of thing, have alcohol permits. This is your prototypical strip joint thing, right? And so this is.
Can I tell you a funny story about strip joints?
Yeah, go ahead.
Years ago, I represented a man named Mario. Oh, I can't remember his last name. I don't remember the last name. And he owned a place called Centerfolds, a strip club in Connecticut and on the Berlin Turnpike, a notorious turnpike. And so he was having regulatory issues with the town in which the club was present. And we fought in federal court for his right to operate. And we largely succeeded. It was a good case. Mario Pizzoli, I think it was. And so, one day we needed to talk. He says, "Why don't you come out to the club?" So I had never, maybe once before in my young adulthood, been in a strip club. This was 10, 15 years ago. So I walk in, the lights are low and the music is throbbing. And there are women performing on
throbbing, yeah.
Well, more about that in a moment. So there were women performing on the pole. And he says, "Sit down, have something to eat." And, like how I was overwhelmed by the environment. I said, "Mario, I'm not comfortable with that. I mean, I'm going to have some sort of anxiety attack sitting here looking at all of this flesh, and you will lose your respect for me as your macho litigator. So we went up to his office. I have just never understood the commodification of desire. I have never understood how it is that we have become a masturbatory culture where it is acceptable to walk into an establishment where women display themselves for the sexual imagination of men, because sex is about contact. And so to commodify that, to objectify that, to place women in and I've represented a number of working girls, shall we say, including prominent madams, Anna Christina in New York, the so-called soccer mom madam. Every person that I have represented who engages in this work ends up strung out and on tranquilizers. And there's a reason for that. I mean, we're not animals. We bond for life. The Old Testament says, or the Bible says, a man and a woman will cleave to one another and become one flesh. There's something to that. I'm in the middle, I'm in the midst of a marital breakup, and the turmoil in my soul is significant. And that's because what's there is no longer, and it's ripped asunder. And the idea that we can use sex and physical intimacy as work, that I'm going to open myself up in some form to another person, make myself available to them for them to deposit their essence, to play at the most intimate connection possible, and then say, okay, your hour is up. That strikes me as the most substantial form of cruelty that I could imagine. And the libertarian in me says, okay, if that's the marketplace that you want to have, let people do it. But the human in me asks me, why would anyone do that to themselves?
Why? Because there's a market for it, and because there's no other. Look, I mean, we don't have to get into the reasons. Some people actually like it. Some people do it out of necessity because they don't recognize within themselves a better, faster path to monetizing a clearer asset of themselves, right? But I want to make sure that I get my point across here, because aside, all
Hard
of
to do with me running my mouth
well,
some
all
days.
of that notwithstanding, I want to make sure that our viewers and listeners get a glimpse of what the law is actually, what is the law, right? And to the extent there is an industry norm, it is regulated, right? And the adult entertainment industry, specifically strip joints, have been have created flashpoints with the First Amendment. How many times, Norm, in terms of locating places? We could probably have Randazza on to talk specifically about that, because he's worked on several of those cases out of Florida and other parts of the country. But what's interesting about this is my understanding of the regulatory compliance framework, and the fact that this principally at the beginning talks about all these soft additional protections for entertainers and employees, right? The training that's necessary and required by the businesses now, installing a panic button, annual reporting. But what I really want to get to make the point that I was talking about earlier is here, right? Ladder down. And just consider this for a second. Subsection 5 here. An adult entertainment establishment must provide at least one dedicated security person on the premises during operating hours, whose primary duty is security, including monitoring interactions, blah, blah, blah. That's probably just a best practice to have somebody there, right? Probably more than one person, whatever. But that's cha-ching, right? You got to pay. And required by law to pay. The department must adopt rules for requiring security persons to not have duties other than security during peak operating hours when necessary, right? So, okay, now that truly is an additional cost. But the rules must take into account, one, the size of the establishment, layout, blah, blah, blah. Then you've got to equip dressing or locker rooms for entertainers with keypad requiring a code to enter, display signage on the entrance.
Money changers in the temple.
Look,
We're
processes and
institutionalizing
procedures.
desecration.
Look, processes and procedures, responding to customer violence stuff, ejecting customers who violate the policy. And then there's additional codification of requirements as it relates to those that hold ABC permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Additional sections down here that again, what this ultimately is just putting the government, the state government, inside of these adult entertainment establishments. So from a business and transactional perspective, this is a massive increase in cost up front, right? And I'm sure that there are some establishments that maybe do a lot of this already, more the popular ones, right? However, the issue is that now that all of this is on the books, is that there is a corresponding enforcement effort that will actually seek to gain money from those that are violating new elements of the code, right? So there'll be this pretty elaborate citation process. There will be money that will have to be paid for offers in compromise, right? Settlements with the state institution to maintain licensure, to avoid losing your liquor license or other stuff like that. I deal with this stuff on every single day of my practice. This is what's going to happen. You're actually growing a government office, right? In order to capitalize.
Entirely demeaned by this. I mean, you want to talk about the public health state. I mean, we're now going to have the state setting up regulations on how people experience intimacy. What next? Orgasm hour? Okay, folks, we're going to masturbate in unison to the same image on the screen. It's Orwellian. This is just wrong. I mean, I understand the need to protect vulnerable people. And I don't know that we want to have a law that, I don't know that we want to live in the Handmaid's Tale.
No, don't be led astray here. This doesn't do anything to enhance employee protections, because the market for this stuff is already robust enough that club owners understand that they have to protect those that actually bring people into the club, right? There's an inherent and embedded interest. Now, I understand that there are people that fall through the cracks, right? I'm not saying that everything is perfect, right? And I'm, again, not making a comment on the existence of this world to begin with at all. All I'm saying is this is a very transparent, I call it a naked government cash grab. They are growing the basis for growing their bureaucracy. This will affect the state budget. This will affect hiring practices. This will affect the cost directly on the business, taxes, etc. Right? So this is Washington State pretending, leaning into the more liberal sensibilities, right? The empathy of like, oh, sex work is work. Oh, employee, shut up. This isn't anything about anything other than Washington State finding a politically convenient way to increase its tax base and its revenue by and through an enforcement of bullshit.
All right. Well, more on this later. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. Hey, those of you out there who are compulsive readers, I need to know, has anybody out there read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit recently? I realize this isn't on the Barnes and Noble's bestseller list, but that book has been much on my mind lately. Anybody out there have read it lately? Shoot us a note. We'll talk to you on the air. There is something about spirit as opposed to the empirical tradition that focuses on things, but focuses instead on the flourishing of the human spirit that I think we need to hear more about. Hegel's work is notoriously difficult. I've tried any number of times throughout my 50-year reading career to comprehend that book and haven't yet. Maybe I'll make another pass at it. Anyhow, listen, folks, thanks for diving into Law and Legitimacy. If you're here in response to a call from Joe at last night, thank you so much. Spread the word. We think we have something to say, and so do you. We'll be on Laid Back Law today at noon, or at least I'll be interviewed at noon. I'm not sure if it's a live show. Eric.
I don't know. We'll be on there. It'll be, it's Laid Back Law, Legal Fridays. We'll be on there today. Noon. Not sure who else will be on there. Probably most of the crew. Joe may even be on there. He's been on there the last.
Hey, did you know that Joe and Ron Coleman are buddies and they pray together in the morning?
I watched the stream last night, and I was delighted to hear that. I almost sent him a couple of previous episodes from our Rumble exclusive days, just so he could kind of verify the Bird McHale dynamic that I branded you guys with way back.
Well, hey, so listen, AMF yo-yo, you know what that means. If you're a regular, if you're not and you're new, it means adios, motherfuckers, you're on your own. As we all are in the end, we have to give an account of ourselves to ourselves and to the universe at large and ultimately to one another. So let's strive to create a community in which we want to live, in which we are nourished, in which we feel enriched. That's not mainstream media right now. That's not the culture at large. It's going to have to start with small acts, handshakes, intimate discussions like the type we try to have here most mornings on Law and Legitimacy. And we got our tech issues more or less solved today. That's good news. I'll be broadcasting from Vermont on Monday and Tuesday, so let's see what the tech gods have to say. Have a great weekend, folks. And here's the word of the day: cherish. Cherish the divine spark. Cherish the personality. Cherish the energy. Cherish your sense of self, and don't abuse it. And then find a person to share that with. That's the essence of what's important in life. Sometimes you learn it the hard way, as I have. So, thanks for listening. Hope to see you next week. Spread the word. We want to build a platform that is self-sustaining. We've got things we want to say. And, if you're looking for an entertaining dinner speaker, I know just the guy. Give us a call, and I may or may not show.
Make sure you've liked the video, please. And if you have not, subscribe. You can even hit that notification bell so you know when Law Pod Daily goes live. We're here every Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, X, and Rumble. Rumble, you'll search Law and Legitimacy. That is the longer but topical heading for the show, at Law Pod Daily on YouTube and X. Again, thank you to all of you new subscribers. An equal and maybe even a bigger thank you to all of the OGs that are here every morning. Julian, Jackson, it's me, Dawn. I'm going to forget names, and I apologize if I don't mention you, but Freedom Lover, Luttrell,
Lawyer Will,
all the OGs, right? Thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to support us. We are seeing a surge in subscribers, and we're going to continue pushing. My job is to elevate this gentleman that you come to really hear about, and that's what I commit to you that I will continue doing. Norm, I will see you around noon. I got to go do some actual work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, me too. I know it's funny how you may say, hey, funky things called bodies, which live in societies which are governed by the rule of law. And so we strive for significance and a sense of integrity in the world. And sometimes we have to bend the world to our will. So go find a rough edge in the universe, knock it smooth. We'll see you Monday.
Thank you in the cloud for the $10 tip over on Rumble. Maybe one day if Rumble gets an integration that's worth a shit over here on StreamYard, I can show the comments from there as well.
Worth a poop.
Funny
story. Funny story. I know a person that loves their Porsche. And so they were in their Porsche with an elderly and ill relative. And that person shat the Porsche. Now the Porsche has to be sold. Such are the traumas that some folks live. Talk to you next week, folks, on Law and Legitimacy.
Truly a Boxster now. Anyway, see you tomorrow. Actually, see you Monday. See you in a little while, Norm. Bye, everybody. AMF, yo.